Believe in the backside, baby. Shake what your mama gave ya. That's the lesson I learned in this week's episode of Space Dandy. When things are looking grim, just shake that ass. This might be one of the most funny and creative episodes of the entire series. And it's also one of the few times where I'm going to say watch both the English and the Japanese version, because the story and the structure is still the same, but it's the music that's going to set this week's episode apart. And that's the best thing about this week's episode. It was a musical! A high school musical! The main story is that Dandy and his crew are looking for a rare alien, and this alien happens to go to this intergalactic alien high school, and Dandy is going to have to infiltrate and pose as a student. That premise alone is hilarious, and they could do a whole episode about it, but they made it even better. The high school that he's going to happens to be filled to the brim with all of these students with musical talent. They can sing, they can dance, and it's an entire part of their student structure. And Dandy really isn't up to snuff with a lot of these students here, and there's a lot of funny scenes where everybody just suddenly starts breaking out into song and dance, and Dandy gets left behind. And it's also great exposition. They explain everything about the school. And what's, I think, really funny about this episode is, even though it's so foreign in the fact that there's, like, all of these crazy aliens around, it's pretty much like any other high school drama film that you've ever seen. It even leads up to prom night, and that's probably one of the other funny things about this episode, is that Dandy wanted to go to school and be a badass, but there's only 1 week left until graduation, so it's up to him to find a date and gain some musical talent, and that leads to a lot of fantastic scenes. After getting snuffed by the popular kids after this very long musical number, he ends up going with this one nerdy-looking girl who is definitely the alien he is looking for, because they make it clear that the alien is going to have a flower bud on their head, and when they fall in love, it'll bloom into an actual flower. Well, she's the only girl who has a sprout on her head, so it's pretty freaking obvious. But what's really great about this scene, and it's probably my favorite scene from this week's episode, and probably one of my favorite scenes from the entire show, period, is that they do a riff on the classic 1980s training montage. And you get to see both Dandy and this girl training, and it even ends with them climbing at the top of a mountain at the end. It's so stereotypical, but it's made even better by the fact that the soundtrack is perfect. It is this old school training montage song with all of these poppy synthesizer noises, and it just fits so well. It's also in this scene where you see that Dandy is starting to pay attention to this girl's butt, and that actually becomes a pretty important part at the end of the episode when they go to prom, and they end up having something of a dance sing-off, which is basically where everybody just gets obsessed with saying booty and swinging their ass around. It's a crazy scene, but it has great animation, especially at the end when that one weird robot like smashes his head through the room and actually uses the lights on his face to sort of like create this big blinding light, which gives Dandy and his date an excuse to give us an extended singing sequence. QT and Meow join in. It's really weird and really ridiculous, and it's the type of episode that I really can't do any justice. It's just the one that you kind of just have to see for yourself, because most of everything that was going on in this week was a lot of big song and dance numbers, and it was just explaining everything perfectly. But it's the differences in both the English and the Japanese version which are really going to make this one special. But what's the rundown on this week's episode of Space Dandy? It was really good, but again, it's another one of those episodes that you're going to have to watch a couple of times just to see all the details. Because not only was there just all of these crazy dance numbers going on, but there are also subplots going on with the Gogol Empire. The main guy, Dr. Gel, wants to go to this school now because he's just obsessed with singing and dancing. And there's a lot of really strange and obscure cameos from 1980s movies this week. I believe I saw Slimer from Ghostbusters literally flying into the camera. And there was also a not-so-subtle nod to The Fly with Jeff Goldblum. You actually saw this dude who was half man, half fly, and he was teaching this class which had these teleportation pods, which are the same ones seen from the Jeff Goldblum film. And I love that I love being a horror nerd so that I could see that shit. Other little things that made this episode funny is the fact that all the anime geeks were just really goofy in the way that they were designed, and the fact that they were singing and dancing at the end and everybody was joining in. It was like friggin' Footloose. It's the only way I can describe it. Just a very funny episode with a lot of creativity that I imagine that the dubbers had a really hard time with. That's the only complaint that I think I have, is that obviously in the English version, when they're singing, especially at the end, the sounds do not match with the lips at all. Like, there's a point where it's like, you can almost tell they're just like, fuck it, we give up. There's no way we're going to be able to sync this properly. And there are some parts where it's a little noticeable like that in the beginning. But that's just something that you can't get over, you know. The Japanese version is going to sound different, but the story is still there. It's still all the same, and there are some minor differences. But this week's episode was just hilarious. It was all about the asses, and I agree, Dandy. There's nothing wrong with being an ass man. So this week's episode is a 9 out of 10. Really, really funny. Check it out in both of its languages. Another fantastic and creative episode of the series. Thank you guys for watching my review today. Before you go, make sure to hit that like button so you can give this video a thumbs up. It really helps out our videos a lot. And please tell me what you thought about this week's episode of Space Dandy. Did you guys have a favorite musical number this week, or are you just not a big fan of musicals in general? Remember guys, before you leave, make sure and subscribe to the channel as well if you haven't already. And you can also check us out on Facebook and Twitter. I'll put links for those in the description box below.
Do you like Amazon.com? I know I do. Corey and I now have an Amazon link in our video description box below. And if you go to it and buy anything through Amazon.com, it will support our channel. So bookmark that link, make it happen, and support our channel without having to do a damn thing.
Another great way you guys can help support our channel is by donating directly through our PayPal link in the description box below. We recommend $2 a month, although this is completely optional. But the best way to go about this is by sneaking into your mom's room and taking $2. This way, she won't even notice. And we won't have to shake you up for all of your lunch money. So guys, that concludes this review today. Super Kami Guru 9000. Out. My anaconda don't want none unless you got buns, hun!